Good morning. I'm Courtney Carr, Director of Marketing and Education for CAPSA. Thank you for joining today's webinar, COVID-19 in Your Business, What the Stimulus Package Means to You, presented by Ari Storch from the Madison Group. During the presentation, you may submit questions into the Questions tab on your webinar toolbar, and we will answer them at the conclusion of the presentation. Following the webinar, you will receive a link to a survey. Once you have completed the survey, there will be a link to download the presentation slides. A recording of today's webinar will also be available for download on the CAPSA website. Ari Storch has more than 25 years of experience in domestic and international politics, grassroots campaigns, public affairs, and marketing. Prior to joining the Madison Group, he spent 12 years as co-founder and co-chairman of Artemis Strategies, a multifaceted government affairs firm that managed clients before the United States Congress, multiple presidential administrations, state governments, and before foreign governments as well. In 2001, Storch was appointed by President George W. Bush to serve as a member of the United States Commission for the Preservation of America's Heritage Abroad, and also served as the Next Generation Chairman of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Ari.
Thank you, Courtney. Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody is healthy and well and safely quarantined in an enjoyable location. Just a bit of legal needs. This presentation is intended only as an informational presentation. We are not intending this as legal, tax, financial, or other advice. We're simply providing this for your knowledge purposes. We encourage you to reach out to your counsels, attorneys, CPAs, or other legal and financial professionals before taking any actions as described in this presentation. And reliance on any of the information in this presentation is purely at your own risk. My bio that my mother wrote, so I will skip over to that. Today we're going to go over some of the programs that have been made available from the United States government to support business in this COVID-19 era. We're going to speak first about small business resources and two of the major programs, Payroll Protection Program and Economic Injury Disaster Loans and Grants. There's a new program out of the Department of Treasury for mid-size and large businesses. We'll go over briefly some of the tax code changes that can really benefit your companies. We'll discuss the new requirements for you to provide paid sick and family medical leave support to your employees. And then we'll finally go over critical business designations, how they come about, and who is sort of covered by those. First of all, and we'll have links throughout this presentation, so please feel free to download and just click those to get directly to them. But we want to give you some good information about, depending on what finances and resources you need. The Small Business Administration, or SBA, has a wonderful page of guidance up on their resources, so you can click on this link. And looking at the different programs, if you need capital to cover the cost of employee retention, the Paycheck Protection Program may be best for you, though that program does depend on the number of employees and your payroll side. If you need a quick infusion of a smaller amount of cash that can cover your business needs right now, you may want to look at an economic injury loan or grant, or otherwise known as EIDL program. Do you have a current SBA loan, or looking at a separate potential SBA loan? There are SBA debt relief programs in place that can assist you. Briefly, to go over the new Paycheck Protection Program, which I'm sure you've all heard of and seen in the news, which unfortunately looks like it may run out of money as early as this week or next week. Congress has attempted, the Republican Senate has attempted to infuse an additional $250 billion or $250 billion more into this program. There's current negotiations between the White House and the Democratic-led House for a compromise to make sure funding gets back into these programs. But this program was created with a great intent of keeping your employees on your payroll. The thought process in Washington was the more folks who remain on payroll, it'll be easier for businesses to ramp back up after COVID-19. Keeping people on payroll is also less expensive than everybody going on to unemployment, which is an additional, as you all know, burden on your business without the benefits of having the employee. So the program provides cash flow assistance through 100% federally guaranteed loans. These are loans at 1% interest to employees who maintain their payroll during the emergency. If you maintain your payroll, your loans will be forgiven and they will be converted to grants. In order to do that, you need to make sure that 75% of all this money is spent on your payroll. The attractive features are forgiveness of up to 8 weeks of payroll based upon employee retention of salary levels. There will be no small business administration fees to establish this. And you even would have 6 months deferral with maximum deferrals up to a year if you convert this if it stays a loan. Eligible entities can apply if they're harmed by COVID-19 between February 15th and June 30th of 2020. But that deadline of June 30th may be extended. The program would be retroactive to February 15th. So if you've already laid off employees, you could bring them back onto your payroll. And as we mentioned, these loans are available through June 30th. Who is eligible for a loan? Any small business that employs 500 employees or fewer, or if your business is an industry that has an employee base size standard through SBA that is higher than 500 employees. Therefore, our purposes, we're focused on the 500 employees or fewer. Some of your customers, restaurants, hotels, or businesses that fall within industry classifications for accommodations and food services. There are several other categories and clarifications in the system for them. And independently owned franchisees with employees under 500 who are approved by SBA are all eligible. Late last week, the loan program was also opened up to sole proprietors, independent contractors, gig economy workers, and self-employed individuals. So the first phase for the first week was purely for the businesses, and the second phase has been to include those other independent. What's the maximum amount you can borrow? And this is where I alluded to earlier, depending on the size of your payroll. The amount you can borrow is 250% of your average monthly payroll expenses, up to a total of $10 million. It's intended to cover 8 weeks of payroll expenses, plus any additional amounts for making payments towards debt obligations. Mortgage interest, but not mortgage principal is a good example. And the 8-week period can go back in time frame from February 15th, and again, looking forward to June 30th. So you can use those funds to cover going backwards or even going forwards. So how can I use the money so that my loan, if I do get this, is forgiven and in essence turned into a grant? The amount of principal that is forgiven is equal to the sum of expenses for payroll, and I'll go over what is included in payroll in a moment. As I mentioned, interest payments, not principal, on mortgages, rent payments, leases, and then utility service agreements. Unfortunately, other business expenses like inventory, while the money can be used to pay for those, that portion would not be forgivable under this program. The most important factor, again, is that payroll side. And what's covered under payroll is pretty large. It includes your salary, your wage, commissions even, or similar compensation, payment for cash tip equivalents, payment for vacation, parental, family, medical, or sick leave is covered. Dismissal or separation allowance is also covered, though again, there will be some keys to this as we come up in a moment. Payment required for the provisions of group health care benefits, including insurance premiums, are allowable usages that would be forgiven. Retirement benefits are allowable uses that would be forgiven. And state and local taxes assessed on compensation would be forgiven. Now, non-eligible under payroll is employee or owner compensation over $100,000 annually. Taxes under chapters 21, 22, and 24. And employees who do not reside within the United States. And if you take qualified sick and family leave tax credits, which we'll go over later, you cannot double dip. And this will be a common theme throughout about there's multiple programs you can apply for, but you can't use the benefits for the same things. So if you utilize those tax credits for sick and family leave, the amount you'd spend out of the PPP money that would be forgivable would be minus that if you used it for the same purpose. Again, how much would be forgiven? Obviously, the whole focus is, as we mentioned, is to keep employee retention at their current base pay. If you keep all employees and you use this for that purpose, all of the loan will be forgiven. Payroll costs plus any payment of interest on any covered mortgage obligation, not including prepayments or payment of principal on a covered mortgage obligation again, plus any payment of any covered rent obligation, and again, any covered utility payment. If you lay off employees, the forgiveness will be reduced by the percentage decrease in the number of employees that you've laid off. So if your total payroll expenses on workers making less than $100,000 annually decreases by more than 25%, loan forgiveness will be reduced by that same amount. If you have already laid off some employees, you can still be forgiven for the full amount of your payroll cost if you rehire those employees by June 30th, 2020. Just a couple of quick links on where to apply. Treasury, Department of CARES, has the main application. You would take this application and then submit it to your bank. Most likely your bank also has the application up on their website as well, but this is an easy location. Again, these programs are designed to be run through your local banks that you have a relationship with. Looking at the second program that is out there is the EIDL program, the Economic Injury Disaster Loans and Grants. The grants provide an emergency advance on a loan of up to $10,000 to small businesses and private nonprofits harmed by COVID-19. You should get access to that money within 3 days of applying for an EIDL. There are some significant differences, though, between EIDL program and the Paycheck Protection Program. To access the advance, you first apply for the EIDL and request the advance. No matter whether you even receive the loan, the advance does not need to be repaid under any circumstance. And it may be used to keep employees on payroll, to pay for sick leave, meet increased production costs due to supply chain disruptions, pay business obligations, including debts, rent, and mortgage payments. However, EIDLs are lower interest loans of up to $2 million, with principal and interest deferment at the administrator of the SBA's discretion. They're available to use to pay for all expenses that could have been met had the disaster not occurred, including payroll and other operating expenses. Again, eligibility is for companies with 500 or fewer employees, sole proprietorships with or without employees, independent contractors, co-ops, and employee-owned businesses, and even tribal businesses. Again, important distinction, an EIDL is a loan with only a portion of it forgiven up front. Otherwise, it is a loan that must be repaid. Now, if you receive and apply for an EIDL, can you get a Paycheck Protection Program loan and grant as well? If you ultimately receive a PPP or refinance an EIDL into a PPP loan, any advance amount received under the grant program, i.e. that $10,000, up to $10,000, would be subtracted from the amount forgiven in the PPP. However, you cannot use the EIDL for the same purpose as your PPP loan. As I mentioned earlier, double dipping. As an example, if you use your EIDL to cover payroll for certain workers in April, you cannot use your Paycheck Protection Plan for payroll for those same workers in the same month. Although you could use it for those workers to cover payroll from March or for different workers in April. So you just cannot use them for the same purposes. That is the summary of the EIDL program. Important note on EIDL, while we said it was an advance of up to $10,000, this program is also running very short on capital right now. we have seen those advances shrink significantly over the last week. I actually received a note from somebody that they're looking at only receiving a $2,000 advance on their loan because the capital just doesn't exist to give away right now. So Congress, as I mentioned, trying to reinstill finances into this program along with the PPP program. Now, if your business is larger than 500 employees, you would not qualify under the SBA programs. So you would need to look at, the Department of Treasury has announced what's known as the new Main Street Partnership Loan Program. There will be $46 billion available for direct Treasury loans for passengers and air cargo carriers, and another $454 billion in loans and loan guarantees for mid-sized to large businesses. These are folks over 500 employees. You must be a United States business and have significant operations and a majority of your employees within the United States. These are loans. The loan terms, Treasury is still working through the implementing regs, but they should be at market rates or better. They'll be no longer for 5 years. However, these loans come with significantly more restrictions on borrowers than the SBA programs. In particular, it's for the term of the loan plus a year after your loan has expired. You cannot do stock buybacks, dividends, or capital distributions. On a sidebar here, we are working through a number of associations in Washington who represent pass-through entities are working on clarity for pass-through entities on dividends and distributions, because that's how many owners are compensated. So we look for Treasury to have some clarifying regs there. Employees above $425,000 in salary in 2019 cannot receive more and are limited to 2 times severance. And employees with over $3 million in compensation in 2019 cannot make more than that amount, plus half the amount over $3 million. Again, this is meant for mid-size to large employees, 500 to 10,000 employees. We're looking at interest rates of probably no more than 2%. There's supposed to be no principal and interest for at least the first 6 months, and the Secretary's discretion is to extend that, which we do expect to take place. There is no specific limit on compensation, but Treasury will be issuing some on their final regs. In order to qualify, you must certify that the uncertainty of economic conditions makes this loan necessary to support your ongoing operations. You certify that the funds are going to be used to retain at least 90% of your workforce at full compensation. Excuse me. You must certify that you intend to restore 90% of your workforce as of February 1st, 2020, and restore any reduced compensation and benefits no later than 4 months after the end of the federally public certified health emergency. As I mentioned before, you must be domiciled in the U.S. with significant operations and employees in the U.S. You cannot be a debtor in a bankruptcy proceeding. No dividends on common stock or repurchase of public equity securities while the loan is outstanding. You cannot outsource or offshore your jobs for the term of the loan plus 2 years after completing repayment of the loan. You cannot renegotiate your collective bargaining agreements for the term of the loan or 2 years thereafter. And you have to allow any union organizing effort during the term of the loan to occur. Now we're going to move on to some of the tax code changes that can really benefit our industry, and CAPSA in particular. One is the Employment Retention Tax Credit. Second is employer payroll tax suspensions. And then we have a change from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that passed a couple of years ago that would allow you to extend your net operating losses in previous tax years. First, let's just touch on the Employee Retention Tax Credit. Qualified, and I have it in quotes, qualified employers receive a credit against employment taxes 50% of qualified wages for every employee for the period of March 13th all the way through December 31st, 2020. There are restrictions on who qualified employers are. I don't think they'll affect our members, but business must fully or partially suspend due to government action. You must have suffered a decline in gross receipts over a period beginning in the quarter when gross receipts were less than 50% compared to the same quarter in the prior year, and ends in the quarter when gross receipts exceed 80%. Qualified wages cannot exceed $10,000 for any employee. So that maximum credit for an eligible employee for qualified wages paid to employees is $5,000. For employers with more than 100 employees, only wages paid for employees not providing services because of the shutdown or decline. And for employers with 100 employees or less, you can get towards all wages paid during the period of shutdown or decline. Next is the payroll tax collection delay. Basically, the government has deferred through the end of 2020 the payment needed for the Social Security 6.2% tax. However, it is still due. So they are requiring that you pay at least 50% of that tax by January 1st, 2021 for those employees, and you must pay the other 50% by January 1st, 2022. However, if you qualify and take a Paycheck Protection Plan loan, you do not qualify for the delayed because government is in essence compensating you for those taxes. So you must pay those taxes, if you received a PPP, and the PPP would be forgiven for the payment of those taxes with it. Finally, in the tax code changes, something that should be very beneficial to everybody on this call is the net operating loss carryback and TI limitations. As everybody knows, in the 2017 TCJA Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, we eliminated the carryback net operating losses to prior tax years. CARES Act, however, now allows for carrybacks for the years 2018, 2019, and 2020, allowing carryback to 5 prior taxable years. And while TCJA limited net operating losses to no more than 80% of your taxable income, the CARES Act now allows 100% offset for taxable years before January 1st, 2021, including this taxable year. Again, I'd encourage you to get with your financial advisors and tax professionals to figure out how this could affect and benefit your companies. Now, one of the first things Congress did in the earliest COVID legislative package was the requirements for paid and sick family leave. The Families First Coronavirus Response Act, it required certain employers to provide their employees with paid sick leave or expanded family and medical leave for specified reasons related to COVID-19. There's a great website with a question and answer section at Department of Labor who administers and enforces these new leave requirements. They go through December 31st of 2020, and I really encourage you to take a look at the link below because it really is a fabulous, they've done a great job at explaining all the fine details, some of which we're about to go into. Generally, the Act requires that covered employees must provide to all of your employees, first of all, 2 weeks of up to 80 hours of paid sick leave at the employee's regular rate of pay, where the employee is unable to work because the employee is quarantined pursuant to federal, state, or local government order or advice from a healthcare provider, and or experiencing COVID-19 symptoms and seeking a medical diagnosis. This can include being quarantined because they came in contact with somebody who has also been diagnosed. Also, 2 weeks of up to 80 hours of paid sick leave at 2/3 of the employee's regular rate of pay because the employee is unable to work because of a bona fide need to care for an individual subject to quarantine, again, subject to those same reasons, or care for a child under the age of 18 whose school or child care provider is closed or unavailable for reasons related to COVID-19, and or the employee is experiencing a substantially similar condition as specified by the Secretary of Health and Human Services in consultation with Treasury and Labor. That latter part will be a little more broad that will be dealt with in the coming weeks. In addition, a covered employee must provide to employees it has employed for at least 30 days, up to an additional 10 weeks of paid expanded family and medical leave at 2/3 of the employee's regular rate of pay, where an employee is unable to work due to a bona fide need to leave or care for a child whose school or child care provider is closed or unavailable for reasons related to COVID-19. That's a pretty big one. Now, these are tax credits that will covered employees will qualify for a dollar-for-dollar reimbursement through refundable tax credits. And it's important to note that Treasury is working on paying those immediately in advance to you, so you don't have to wait for those tax credits. Qualifying wages are those paid to an employee who takes leave under the Act for the qualifying reason, up to the appropriate per diem and aggregate payment caps. Applicable tax credits also extend the amounts paid or incurred to maintain health insurance coverage. So again, while they're on leave, that tax credit can also be for those costs. IRS has a fabulous link up with all of the rules and regs around this as well. You're welcome. Please go through that with your financial professional and tax advisors. That will really help you understand all of the finances that are available to help you compensate for the loss of those employees for those paid sick and family leave. Now, who is a covered employer? As we always mention, paid sick leave provisions apply to private employers with fewer than 500 employees. There is a great loophole here. For small businesses with fewer than 50 employees, you may qualify for an exemption from the requirement for these additional leaves if it would jeopardize the viability of your business. You have to apply to the Department of Labor for a waiver. Those rules are still forthcoming, but there's an employer fact sheet up at the Department of Labor here, and you'll be able to find all the necessary links if you find yourself in that situation. Finally, I want to touch on critical business designation. While we all believe our businesses are critical and important, sometimes state and local officials do not necessarily agree with us. As a result, the federal government, particularly the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, has designated what the federal government believes are those industries with a special responsibility to continue operations during this time frame. Please understand this is only guidance to state and local and industry partners in identifying critical infrastructures. This is a state and local designation ultimately. So all the federal government can do is give guidance on what they believe is the most important pieces. So it's not a mandate, but it is guidance. There are 16 critical infrastructure sectors. Obviously, we believe most CAPSA falls under critical manufacturing. This also includes distribution as well. So we believe that all of our members would be covered under these guidelines. Now, I want to kind of share with you something. This was an email from one of my friends with the highest reaches at the Department of Commerce. I would strongly urge you to advise senior leaders in your companies to have your plant managers or your business leaders reach out to your local public health officials and your mayors to educate them on this guidance. When a closure order goes out or is crafted, governors will rely on mayors and local public health officials to determine which facilities will be accepted. Leaning forward now to educate local officials on the role each facility plays in the support of public health and hygiene will be hugely helpful to prevent shortages on other issues. However, while they've given us this guidance, the Department of Commerce really wanted to encourage you, if you can, to close and keep your employees at home, because first and foremost is about protecting the health and getting past this phase. And the programs we've mentioned are designed to help your businesses stay economically viable. But if you do believe you are engaged in critical infrastructure and work that is critical at this time, this is the best way to ensure your supply chain stays intact, that your deliveries are able to arrive to you and leave from your operations, and you'll be able to continue your operations. I now turn it over to Courtney and be glad to answer any questions I can for you on these programs that are designed to help you and your employees stay healthy and with the appropriate resources stay economically viable. Courtney.
Thanks, Ari. As a reminder, please submit any questions using your webinar toolbar. We'll give it a minute or so for them to come in. But we did have one question. So the CARES Act was phase 3 of legislation to move through Congress. Ari, will there be a phase 4?
I believe, thank you for the question. I believe there will be a phase 3.5 as we're kind of referring to the reinfusion of cash. And phase 4, there will be a phase 4 that will be much more focused on restarting the economy. We believe infrastructure will have a huge piece in that puzzle, which obviously can benefit a lot of our members. So, you know, the timing of that, Congress has announced they will not return until at least the week of May 4th. I would expect at that time we start seeing at least a draft from the House of Representatives first on their vision. They're already diligently working on it. It will be very large and have many issues that are not necessarily directly related to restarting the economy, but it will have everything from infrastructure to broadband infrastructure to clean air provisions and environmental provisions. Once it hits the Senate, however, the Senate's vision at this time is what programs, how did PPP, how did these tax credits, and how did these other finance credits help and benefit, including the financing to states and hospitals? Where were the gaps and loopholes? How do we fix those? Because nobody expects this to be over in May. And so how do we fix these things going forward so we can sustain and reopen the economy in the long haul? The White House does agree with a major infrastructure spend. How we pay for that is something that's still yet to be determined. That's a major piece of the puzzle. So I would expect ultimately there to be a phase 4. I do not think it will be as quick as the other packages. But the first thing we're going to see is hopefully by the end of this week, a phase 3.5 to instill more money into the Small Business Association lending programs that we've mentioned. I do want to also give a piece of advice that we were delivered to us from SBA. If you have not already applied for PPP or an EIDL, apply. Don't just apply to one bank. Frankly, the guidance that our folks at SBA have told us to share with our members and our clients is to apply, as we joke about vote early, vote often. Apply early and apply often. Apply at multiple banks. You can only qualify for the program once, but different banks are moving at different speeds. So if you have not already done so, please apply. Even if the programs run out of money before your loan is approved, you will be ahead of the queue for when the new funds, and there will be new funding available when that hits. So you need to get in line as early and as often as possible. If you have multiple LLCs under your corporate structure, each one of those LLCs could even qualify for its own EIDL or even PPP programs. Again, the monies cannot be used for the same companies for the same purposes, but you need to start getting in line for those as soon as possible.
Great, thank you, Ari. So we don't have any more questions come through. For those who are on the line, if you come up with questions later, please feel free to reach out to CAPSA and we can pass them on to Ari. This concludes our presentation. As a reminder, you will receive a survey about today's presentation. Once you complete the survey, there will be a link to download the presentation slides. A recording of today's webinar will also be available on the CAPSA website on the webinar page. Please feel free to share within your company. Thank you so much.